Hello, everyone, and welcome to my book study of the book Critical Literacy, Critical Teaching, Tools for Preparing Responsive Teachers. And this book was written by Cheryl Dozer, Peter Johnston, and Rebecca Rogers. Our strategy to get started today, and one of the strategies that is talked about in this book as a tool for reading comprehension, is to choose a well-known story and change the story so that you can see it from another character's point of view. So you would tell the story to the class and explain why you chose the character that you did to see the story from their point of view. For example, you could change the story, The Three Little Pigs. Everybody knows that story. You could change it to actually see the story from the wolf's point of view instead of from the Three Little Pigs' point of view. And it would be a totally different story, indeed, if we could see it from the wolf's point of view. Now, the reason why this book was written was because there was some research needed in how professors and universities teach students that are in the teacher education program how to teach reading. And the book said that universities do not often practice what they preach. So the question was asked, well, how can we teach problem solving? What assignments and activities make sense, and what beliefs are productive? And the main goal was to how can we prepare teachers for their students? I know that I have heard a lot of new teachers say that they were really thrown to the wolves when they started teaching their first year, and that they were not very prepared from college to the classroom. And of course, everybody really learns better in a hands-on situation. And a lot of the things that you are taught in college, unless you're actually in the classroom, you really cannot get a sense of what is going to happen. And I believe that college professors really do their best in preparing students. But this is just some research that one group did. And they did an action research where they actually had a literacy lab that went into a minority school. And it was an insider-outsider research. So the outsiders were the teachers that actually went into the schools and put these skills and strategies for reading comprehension and teaching children to read into action. So the first problem the book said that teachers have going into classrooms is the hurdles of histories. There are cultural differences, and especially in this book where all the teachers were mainly white females, and they went into like an inner city school. It was high poverty, high minority, and so there were some cultural differences there. Some of the teachers really felt uncomfortable going into those classrooms, and so they needed to be taught how to see with different eyes when looking at their students. Um, the unfortunate thing is when teachers go into the classroom, they already have socialized histories, they already have their practiced routines, they already have tightly woven beliefs and values, and a lot of time that can really hurt them as far as teaching their children and being able to reach each student. And so they have to really open themselves up to change. And so some of the things they need to change are their language choices and their language practices. Students need to be able to understand what teachers are teaching them. So we don't need to talk above their heads. We need to be able to bring the information we're teaching down to their level so that they can understand what we're teaching. So sometimes, a lot of times, teachers have to change their own histories to be able to teach well. Now, in this action research, the teachers were sent. They gathered their data through sensitive observation. They became kid watchers, and we need to do that too in our classrooms. We can learn a lot just by watching our students, from observing our students. We need to plan and cross-check. We need to see activities from the student's point of view. It's easy to plan up an activity or maybe find an activity online and say, oh, this will work with the standard I'm teaching, and give it to your students and say, okay, here's what you're going to do it. But we really, before we do that, we need to see the activity from the student's point of view. Are the instructions simple enough that your students are going to understand what to do? And will this activity be meaningful? Will they actually learn what you're trying to teach them from the activity? We need to choose books and activities that are within the zone of proximal development. That means that the books and activities need to be on the student's level, but they also need to be a little bit challenging, to challenge our students to help them grow. We need to follow the student's lead. We kind of need to let our students be in control of their own learning process. And that's hard a lot of times for teachers, because we go into a classroom, we are the person who knows the most about everything in that classroom. We are there to teach, and we feel like we need to be in control of everything that happens in that classroom all day long. But we need to learn to back off a little bit, and we need to learn to let students take control of their learning process. Now, I don't mean we need to let them just run wild and do what they want to do, but we need to give them enough freedom so that they are in control of part of their learning. They need to try new things. And like I said before, the activities and the tasks, they need to be manageable. They need to be on the student's level, but they also need to be challenging so that the student can actually have a higher level of thinking, and it will make them grow as readers. Okay, so we also need to make literacy active. What does that mean? Well, we need to be able to teach our students that there is a purpose for literacy. There's a purpose for reading. And we need to show them what literacy can do for them. They need to know that authors write purposefully for a reason. And some of the ways they can understand what the author's purpose was for writing a certain text is through the words the author used, the genre that the author wrote, what kind of language choices did the author use, what was the point of view of the story, who told the story, what is the setting. And when our students learn that writing and literacy and text are out there for a purpose, not just because the teacher said I had to read it, there's a reason why they should read it. That will open up discussions where your students can have a discussion and they can decide and come to a conclusion of what the author's purpose was. What did the author want us to learn from what they wrote? Critical literacy is especially important because it helps students figure out who they are as a person. And they can find literacy that fits their life. There are thousands of texts out there that students can read. And when students find out that there are stories or maybe newspaper articles or other text out there that fits their life, then they will become more interested in reading. Now, like I said before, in this action research study, the teachers were mainly white, middle class females, and they were put into a situation where they were teaching minorities. Now, one of the things that the action research, the people who took place in that, they did home communication. And here are a few tools they used for communication home. And these are things that we could use in our own classroom. They did photographs. The teachers bought disposable cameras, and now we're in the age where every teacher has a smartphone that they can take pictures of the students. They don't need to buy a disposable phone, a disposable camera anymore. But they started at the beginning of the year and they took photographs of each student. And by the end of the year, they had composed like a little book for each student. And the photographs showed lived literacies. And what that means is actually literacies or stories about the children throughout the school year. And they may have used different language or symbols, but all of it made a connection between the student and the story that their life in this particular classroom told throughout the year. Another way of communicating with families is through family stories. Now, in order to get to know your students better, especially if they are a different culture, ethnic group than you, is learning their family stories. And this can come through journal writing. You can have a family member write in a journal at home. You can have the student write in their journal and tell stories about their family or, ancestors, things they've heard, stories passed down through the years. You could actually interview a family member, or you could help a student come up with interview questions so that they could maybe interview a grandparent or aunt and uncle. You can record the family stories. You can actually have a family member record their story on tape or on digital media so that you can actually hear them telling the story. And the reason this is important is because the themes of each family actually should become the text of your curriculum that you teach in the classroom. If you want your children or students in the classroom to really become interested in reading, then they need to make a connection between their life, their family theme, and the text they are reading. More home communication, family journals. You may want to get a notebook for each student that you can send home. Now, it would be probably too hectic to write in every family journal every day, but maybe you could find time in your school week to write in the family journal once a week, send it home, and then the parent or whoever at home would write something back. Um, Things you can ask is tell me about your child. What are their likes, their dislikes, their hobbies, their interests? This helps the teacher to actually see each student as a person and not just a number in their classroom. You can also invite parents or family members into your classroom for observations, and this helps the people at home to see the student's strengths. I think a lot of times the only contact we make home is just to tell the parents or guardians what their children have done wrong. But we also need to communicate that their children have strengths as well, and we also need to let them know the things their children are doing right. And once you get the parents involved, that will increase literacy for the student because the student will see that their family member has become involved in their learning and they'll want to do better. And also, it will help the family member to know um, what the student's strengths and weaknesses are and what they can work with at home with their child. You can also use phone conversations. If you do this, remember to focus on the learning, what their student is learning in the classroom, how well they're doing, what they're struggling with, maybe what they need extra help with at home. Don't just focus on behavior. We need some good calls home as well. You can email, um, but I would only suggest this if that is what the family member has communicated to you is best for them for communication. Um, they may not have a phone, different things. If they say that they would rather be communicated with through email, then go ahead and do email. You can also do home visits, and I know in our county where I teach, we do have a home visiting program in place. And when you do home visits, you're able to see for yourself firsthand what the family structure is like. Now, we have to face it that not every student has a mom, dad, lives in a house, has, a few brothers and sisters, and what people would call the normal family. Most families do not fit into that anymore. We have students that are being raised by grandparents, by aunts, uncles, cousins, maybe in foster care, and it's important for us to know what the family structure is like. We can also see what level of poverty they live in. I saw a quote that said, students that are loved at home come to school to learn. But students that are not loved at home come to school to be loved. And that goes hand in hand with poverty a lot of times. Um, so we need to know that about our students. And once we see those things firsthand for ourselves, that will change our viewpoint of our students. And that will change how we reach them and how we connect with them. Now, there is an emphasis on critical literacy. And when I say critical literacy, I mean literacy that pertains to our students, things they can relate with. It needs to be personally and socially relevant to our students. If we want them interested in reading, then we need to give them things to read that they are personally and socially interested in, things that are relevant to them and their lives. We can do this by using the genre approach. We can do this by using student-led problem posing. Um, we need to have a discussion in our classrooms and let our students tell us the things that are relevant to them. And then we can focus on social issues and we can find text that relates to that. What really the only way to do that is to provide multiple literacies or multiple books or opportunities to read, and maybe not just books, like I said before. We could have students read newspaper articles. We could have them read things about Pokemon if a student is really into that. Whatever it takes to get a student reading what they're interested in, that is critical literacy. Now, power and language. Let's talk about the kind of language we use in the classroom. Our language is central to teaching and it's central to learning. It is actually power. What we say has power. It can be a very powerful thing. And so when we are teaching students, we need to use a common language. And I don't just mean English or, some other language that the student understands. What I mean when I say we use a common language is we need to use simple terms. If we use big words that our students don't understand, and I do know that students need to learn vocabulary, it's very important, but we have to teach that. And a lot of students come to us with a very limited vocabulary. So we need to make sure when we talk to our students, we're talking in a way that they understand us. Also, our language with parents. When we talk to the parents, don't use any jargon. And jargon is special words or expressions that are used by a particular profession or group. and they're difficult for others to understand. Now, when we're talking with our colleagues, we can use professional terms. But when we're talking with our students and our parents, we need to use that common language, that shared language. We need to use words that they will understand. Most miscommunication comes through somebody misunderstanding what you said. So make sure that you use simple terms and speak to them in a way that they will understand what is expected of them. And if you do this, you'll avoid confusion. Assessing and representing learning. And they call this roaming in the known. And what that means is you're following the learner's lead. So you need to find materials that are not too difficult. You need to see the student's positive behaviors, locate that zone of proximal development. That's that area where your student is. And give them things, like I said, that are manageable, tasks that they can do, but that are also a little challenging. If it's too hard, they will just give up. They will not even try because they will become so frustrated with it. They do need to be challenged, but not too much. And the way that we know how to do that is to listen and to follow the student's lead. Document learning. One way to keep up with everything that you're learning, you need to document what type of practices you're doing, which is what they did with their action research, and then they needed to document the results. And one way they did that was through observation. Then they had data that they kept up with, and then they kept running records where they actually wrote about each student throughout this procedure. We need to teach children to be literate and not just teach literacy. And what does that mean? That means they read and they understand what they're reading and they can apply what they're reading. They can make that connection to the world, to their self, or to other texts. So we need to do individualized instruction. We need to teach what the students need to know so that they will be able to move to independence, so they can be independent in their learning process. And so they need to move to independent. We need to move to independence too, from delivering the curriculum, just standing up there and talking all day long and not giving our students a chance to weigh in on what we're talking about. That is not how we should teach. We shouldn't just deliver the curriculum, but we should construct the curriculum with the students in mind so that we allow them an opportunity to join in on their learning. Learning is continuous. You're constantly learning. From the time you're born until the time you die, you learn every day. So we need to pay close attention to our students. We need to figure out what their needs are, what their interests are, and what understanding they have of literacy. We also need to use specific praises and prompts. Now, I know that a lot of times in our classroom, we'll say, oh, that was a good answer. That was a good try. You did very well. Good job. High five. But we need to be specific when we praise our students. We need to tell them exactly what they did right. There's power in positivity. We need to use appropriate prompts and we need to use specific praise. Let's say that one of our students, the assignment was they had to answer why a character did what they did in the story. And we want them to use details from the story to support their answer. So, a particular student, they list all the details. They don't skimp on any of the details. Should we just tell them they did a good job? We could, and that is praise, but we should use specific praise. For example, I really like the way you put those details in your answer because that lets me know you understand why that character acted the way they did. You need to be specific in your praise. then you can share other strategies that they could try. If you tell a student specifically what they did right, then that student will continue to use that skill and that strategy. We can model reading and writing, and that's one of the things that good teachers should do. And um, we need to create a safe environment. We need to show students that we make mistakes as well, and we can do that by doing a think aloud in our classroom. And we can show students how we think about a question and mistakes we make along the way. We need to give students a choice in their reading. 2 or 3 choices. They need to be on level, and they need to be something that the student is interested in. And one way to know what the student is interested in is by doing a reading interest survey. And these pictures are graphic organizers. I found them on Teachers Pay Teachers, and I have included the citing information on the last page of this PowerPoint, but these are surveys that you can give your students so that you can learn more about what they're interested in reading. Students also need to be able to know which books to choose, which books are on my level. A lot of times students will pick a book to read based on what the cover looks like. Or maybe it's a book that their friend is reading, but that book may be too hard for them to read. So how do readers know which book to pick? We need to be able to show students how to choose, because if they choose something that's too hard for them to read, they're going to lose interest. And how do students know what to read? Well, have them pick up a book, kind of skim through it, maybe read the first chapter or the first couple pages. And if the book is too challenging for them, or there are a lot of words they don't understand, they need to choose another book. We need to be there to guide our students, to guide their learning. We need to guide them to read books. And one way to do that is to show our students that we like to read too. We need to talk to our students about what kind of books we like to read, maybe what we're reading right now. And especially for middle school or high school, you could really go into more of a discussion about the books you're reading. But we need to guide students to appropriate books, and we need to talk to students about the books they're reading. I can't stress this enough. If you're going to have a book in your classroom library, you need to read that book. You need to read it before you put it in your classroom library. You need to know what this book is about, whether or not it's appropriate for your student. And then if you've read the book, when your student reads the book, you're going to be able to have a discussion with them about that book. And that will increase their interest in reading. This is the end of my book study. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you found some tools that you can use in your classroom. Here are my works cited. I found the graphic organizer on Teachers Pay Teachers under the store, the Reading Roundup. So if you would like to use that in your classroom, you can go there. It was free. All you have to do is go there and download it. Okay, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoyed my book study.